That night it rained as if the sky wanted to wash everything away. Hannah sat by the window with a cup of hot tea. The streetlights made her room look like a fishbowl. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Cold-drenched, he knocked on the door. She opened it. He had an envelope inside his jacket, protected from the water. He didn't say anything at first. He just left the envelope on the table next to the cup. Hannah noticed the embossed seal. Blackwood felt his throat tighten. "It's a copy of the pact," Cole said quietly, "and also my renunciation of any ceremony arranged by the council. If they want me out for this, so be it. But I'm not going to let them turn you into a remedy for their superstition." Hannah held the paper with hands that were no longer trembling. There was ink, signatures, dates from another era, and a fresh sheet of paper, written that same afternoon, where Cole Blackwood declared that he would not accept a marriage out of fear. "I don't know if we can handle everything that's coming," Hannah said, without looking up from the document. "But for the first time, I don't feel alone." Cole reached out, not yet touching her, as if asking permission. "You're not alone, Hannah. Not in this city. Not with me." The rain hit the glass harder. On the ledge, the green notebook with the drawings of hands and keys, it seemed to breathe. Hannah took a breath. She opened the drawer and took out the letter never sent. They placed it on the record, as if the times had finally met. "So let's write the new version," he said. "And, whatever happens, let it bear our names." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't seek out cameras. The distance between them became short, human. The city, outside, continued to invent rumors. Inside, on the table, 3 symbols were lined up like an oath. The letter, the notebook, and the small key hanging from its red ribbon. She arrived with her shoulders hunched and a coat that no longer held any warmth. The lobby marble felt like a frozen lake beneath her. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway that smelled of new wood and power. Every step she took whispered the same thing to her: "You don't belong here." Hannah Lane clutched her worn purse to her chest. Inside she carried a green notebook, an unsent letter folded in four, and a tiny key tied to a red ribbon. She didn't know that those 3 things would be her compass when everything started to fall apart. Before continuing, the narrator pauses briefly to breathe with the listener. "Thank you for being here. Tell me where you're listening from and if you've ever felt like you were walking in a place not made for you. Your presence and support mean a lot to me. Now, let's get back to this story that will change what you thought about love and resilience." Hannah climbed one more floor and stopped in front of a frosted glass door. "North Studio," the sign said, though the papers called it something else, the place where impossible deals were made. She needed this temporary job. She needed it like air. Her mother had pawned the last of the family jewels to pay the back rent, and the building's owner had left a polite, cruel note in the mailbox reminding her that her patience was running out. Hannah swallowed. She'd felt like a ghost in her own city for weeks. On the other side of that glass, the world moved with the confidence of those who never had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying food. The receptionist looked her up and down with a mechanical expression. Hannah introduced herself in a soft voice, said she was here for the night editing position, that she had samples on her flash drive, and that she could start immediately. The assistant nodded without interest, made a quick call, and showed her to a waiting room. That's when she saw him, tall, wearing a dark suit, the shadow of a storm in his eyes. He had the physique and pulse of someone accustomed to making decisions that affect hundreds. Cole Blackwood crossed the hall with the silent movement of predators who don't need to announce themselves. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd walked through the rain without an umbrella, and he had a restrained expression that said the world was slightly out of place, but he would put it back in its place. Hannah knew the last name. Everyone did. Half the city seemed to bear the invisible stamp of the Blackwood. Buildings, restored parks, discreet donations that cleansed old guilt. What almost no one knew was that this family kept an old pact like a curse. Cole walked past the living room, and for a second, their eyes met. He held hers just barely, enough to make Hannah's heart race without knowing why. It wasn't the first time she'd seen him. There was another story, further back, in the middle school hallways, a uniform that was too big, glasses that reflected more than they, other people's laughter that weighed like stone. He'd been there, always 2 steps above her, the boy who didn't smile, the name that opened doors, and there had also been the shadow of a rumor. When they came of age, 2 branches of families bound by superstition would join together in a marriage that would ward off bad luck. She had promised herself not to believe in tales about the dead. He'd known, long before that the dead sometimes signed contracts. Hannah's interview was quick and thorough. Technical questions, impossible schedule, a salary that seemed decent until it became a risk. She accepted without hesitation. When she stepped outside, the city pelted her with its fine rain, and the wind reminded her of the conversation she'd been avoiding all day. Her mother needed to know if they'd be paying that month. Hannah sat on a bench under the awning of a cafe and opened her purse. She took out her green notebook. On the first page was glued an old photo, her at 15, a girl with awkward bangs and an inherited sweater, holding a debate trophy that no one applauded. On one side, in small print, she'd written a promise. "Someday I'm going to count myself differently." She closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. Elsewhere in the city, Cole walked down a glass corridor, a sealed envelope in his hand. His grandfather was waiting for him at the end, sitting in a private room where the silence was thicker than the air. The old man held a cane, not out of necessity, but out of memory. He said with his eyes what his voice no longer repeated: "Lineage is not negotiable." The pact had saved the Blackwoods from losses, fires, and harvest failures that once mattered. His father called it tradition. His grandfather called it debt to the ancestors. No one called it by its true name: fear. Cole left the envelope on the table and stood. Inside was a discreet list of potential alliances. First names, last names, nicknames, heirlooms, photographs taken from a distance. That was the language of his family. He could have signed and followed the script. He could have chosen someone who would sleep at his house and never again in his life. He could, if not for the fact that, ever since his adolescence, there had been a fixed image in his memory. A girl in a cheap sweater and a look that said enduring isn't the same as belonging. Cole had seen a group of classmates slap labels on that girl's back: weird, provincial, ugly, too proper, too quiet. He had also seen how she peeled off each label when she got home, one by one, without anyone knowing. He knew this because he had once followed her from afar to a brick building with yellow lights. He did it out of a curiosity he couldn't name. Since then, every time the city offered him an easy way out, a part of him returned to that high school hallway and those eyes. The assistant knocked on the door to let them know the board was waiting. Cole didn't move. He remembered a fact he'd buried. He came of age, and the board proposed names. He chose not to. No one forced him because his grandfather fell ill, because the company was on the verge of losing a deal, because life took care of postponing the inevitable. Until now. That night, the city cast a curtain of rain over the building. Hannah arrived at her apartment smelling of damp and soup. She opened the unsent letter, the one she'd written when she was 17 and had left the address blank. In the letter, she spoke to her future self. She told her simple and also impossible things. She told her not to forget who she'd been when everyone called her names that still hurt. She told her that one day someone would see her without labels. She never sent it because she never knew where. She folded it carefully again and put it away. The green notebook and the small key began accompanying her to North Studio like clumsy emulations. The following weeks were like a sleeper. Hannah learned to move clips with the precision of a cheap surgeon, to correct audio with dark circles under her eyes, to understand the secret language of bosses who don't look and colleagues who judge. The HR lady called her by her last name for several days, as if naming her would grant her citizenship. Some editors ignored her, others treated her condescendingly. A couple of young, well-dressed women heard her shy laugh one day and imitated it in the bathroom with polished malice. Hannah wrote a sentence in the notebook: "To resist is also to write." One morning, a technical problem halted the export of a multi-million-dollar project. The clock was ticking down to a legal delivery. Tension swirled on every screen. The shift manager barked orders that fixed nothing. Hannah, who had spent years fixing old computers in her building in exchange for rent discounts, understood the error at first glance. She said it calmly. The boss silenced her with a gesture. She said it again, slowly, with a clarity that brooks no arrogance. The boss snorted, handed over the keyboard, and in 5 steps she fixed what others couldn't in 15. The boss remained silent and then took credit for it in front of a mass email. Hannah took a deep breath and said nothing. She jotted down another phrase in her notebook: "Choosing your battles is also growing." The next morning, as she left the building with the first light shining on her face, she ran into a group of employees looking at their phones. On a screen, a corporate gossip blog announced an old rumor in a new guise: the Blackwoods would revive a family tradition to seal a deal. The comments were filled with unspoken certainty. Hannah felt an inexplicable unease. She didn't want to know why some of that rumor was tangled with her breathing. Cole read the same blog from a limo he hadn't ordered. His assistant, an intelligent-eyed woman named Mara, reminded him of his schedule for the day. He thought about the envelope with the photos and the pact. He thought about his grandfather, his eyes half closed, and his father, with the elegance of those who never step into puddles. He thought, most of all, about the girl in the cheap sweater, who was now perhaps editing videos at a studio he helped finance without her name appearing. He told himself this wasn't the time to cross paths. He told himself it wasn't prudent. And yet, in the middle of the afternoon, he changed his route and asked to be dropped off half a block from North Studio. He didn't go in. He stood under an awning like any other citizen. It was drizzling. He watched the doors, the people coming and going, the small hierarchies of clothing and footsteps. He watched her leave. She no longer wore large glasses or the inherited sweater, but she still held the same dignified grip on her purse strap. She didn't see him. Her invisibility was a coat she'd learned to wear. Cole felt something he hadn't felt in years, the urgency to intervene without ruining everything. That afternoon, in the studio, a cruel rumor spread. Someone had tagged Hannah's locker with a nickname that had haunted her since. On the way out, two classmates followed her a few steps away for fun. Sometimes the world is no more sophisticated than a poorly managed recess. They pushed her with a joke that wasn't funny, and her bag fell, opening on the floor. Her notebook, the folded letter, the key. Everything was exposed as if the city had lifted the blouse from her soul. Hannah immediately ducked. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. One of the girls picked up the key with her fingertips as if it were an insect. She said all poor girls collect keys to other people's houses. The other laughed. Hannah felt the old pang in her chest, the one from when she was 15, the one from the hallway where no one stood up for her. She reached out silently to retrieve her key. Cole's voice wasn't thunder. It was barely a change in temperature. He approached with unhurried steps, bent down, picked up the letter from the floor, shook it with a delicate gesture, and handed it to Hannah with all the respect he hadn't been given. Then he looked at the two classmates with a calmness more frightening than shouting. He asked if they had anything else to do. He didn't say it with words, but with the body of someone who can close doors they'll need to open tomorrow. The girls murmured something and left. Hannah picked up the key and the notebook. Her heart was beating fast. She didn't look Cole in the eyes for more than a second. She said thank you without saying it. He nodded without agreeing. It wasn't a spectacular rescue. No one recorded a video. There was no triumphant music. Just two people sharing a shame that wasn't theirs. When the street became a street again, Cole wanted to tell her his name, but he didn't. He wanted to disappear and also stay. What he did was walk side by side, half a block, in silence, as if the city had finally given them some leeway. Over the next few days, something changed subtly. At North Studio, those who had witnessed the episode were careful not to repeat it. Not out of sudden kindness, but out of proof. The meekness of the powerful is also a weapon. Hannah continued working, each night a little more confident in her grip. Sometimes, as she turned the corner on her way out, she felt a presence that didn't invade. She didn't know if it was paranoia or company. She grew accustomed to that sensation like one grows accustomed to traffic lights that don't change. The pact, meanwhile, was moving forward on another table. The Blackwood board had decided to expedite announcement. A financial columnist hinted at a merger that, without naming him, called for a social gesture. Grandfather invited Cole to dinner with words that seemed like a favor and were actually an order. The long table, the china that sounded like it belonged in a museum, the wine served by someone else's. The conversation was choreographed. Future, legacy, stability. Cole answered with minimal correctness. He didn't promise. He didn't deny. Grandfather looked at him with cruel patience. He said a strong family needs living symbols. He said the city believes what it sees. He said old fears require new rituals. No one mentioned love. The first twist came one Friday afternoon. North Studio was preparing a public event to show a charity documentary. Giant screen, wine-colored carpet, photographers from minor blogs pretending to be from major magazines. Mara, Cole's assistant, had the idea of bringing him along to humanize his image. He reluctantly agreed. He didn't want photos. He didn't want questions about the legacy. He wanted some air. He agreed because sometimes the most efficient way to escape is to walk across the room. Hannah was assigned to the control booth. She wore a simple white blouse and her hair pulled back with a cheap barrette that did the trick. She felt calm, yet at the same time, she had the strange feeling of walking on the edge of something. She scanned the guest list and read a name that resonated, Cole Blackwood. She didn't know what to feel, nor did she want to feel it. When he arrived, the air in the lobby changed slightly. The flashes weren't aggressive, they were respectful, like those of an elegant animal. Cole greeted her without pausing. He seemed absent and focused at the same time. He climbed the stairs to the floor where the booth was located. He paused before the door. He had asked to speak to the technical team to thank them for their work, a calculated and sincere gesture. Upon entering, he saw her again, this time with the light from the monitors on her skin. Hannah wasn't surprised. She simply looked down at her controls as if she could also control her own question. They spoke briefly. He said he admired the result. She replied that it was a credit to the team. He mentioned a color error he'd noticed, and she smiled because she'd spent hours correcting precisely that. There were no obvious tensions, no sparks that ignited. There was something else, the silent recognition of two people who had already crossed paths before they crossed paths. As the event began, a whisper of rumors swept through the room. Someone posted a thread on social media suggesting the Blackwood family would fulfill an old promise that season. The name of an heiress from another company was mentioned, without proof. The room, despite the big screen and images of hospitals and donations, became a theater of whispers. Hannah received messages on the console about technical changes, as if the external noise could be fixed with a slider. On stage, the host joked with a line he shouldn't have said, one of those lines that seems innocent but is poison. This city loves happy endings arranged by fate. Halfway through the documentary, the main audio cut out due to a routing glitch. The seconds stretched like chewing gum. Someone in production froze. Hannah, without raising her voice, reassigned signals, hot-swapped a cable, and pushed a backup. The sound returned as if it had never been there. From the audience, Cole looked toward the booth. He didn't see any hands, but he knew which ones they were. The second twist came in the form of an invitation. After the event, Mara approached him with genuine kindness. She said they were organizing a technical appreciation visit to an audiovisual restoration workshop the Blackwood family was sponsoring behind closed doors, and would like her to join as part of the featured team. It wasn't a prize, Mara said. It was a chance to see machines you can't see. Hannah accepted with that strange mix of humility and pride that is like fitting into a dress you didn't know fit. The workshop was in a recycled building in the old factory district. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings, light falling like an industrial blessing. The manager, a restorer who spoke like a kind professor, showed them tapes that had survived floods and neglect. Hannah approached a table where an old projector rested. She felt the urge to take notes and opened her green notebook. Cole watched her from a few feet away, without interrupting, wondering how such a simple object could contain so much order. There was a clumsy, beautiful moment. Hannah accidentally dropped the small key. It fell to the floor and rolled to a stop in front of some shelves. Cole picked it up before anyone stepped on it. He held it for a second. He had the absurd feeling it wasn't just any key. He carefully returned it. She put it away with a discreet bow, like someone guarding a secret that can't be translated. In that gesture, Cole felt he, too, was about to put away something he couldn't yet name. The third twist appeared where problems often appear in the modern era, in a viral video. Someone uploaded a maliciously edited clip of the locker room incident to social media, accompanied by comments that transformed Hannah into a character. Within hours, the gossip mongers had concocted a biography, the girl who sought to marry a Blackwood to stop being in. There was hatred disguised as irony, and at its center, a face with no right to reply. North Studio reacted with appropriate speed. They didn't repudiate the harassment, but suggested Hannah take a few days to let the storm pass. Storms, she reasoned, rarely pass alone. That night, in her apartment, Hannah took out the unsent letter. She unfolded it with firm hands. She reread her teenage promise. She wanted to burn it, but couldn't. She opened her notebook and wrote a line that looked like a beacon. No one defines me from the outside. Then she took the key and placed it on the table as if it were a person who needed to be explained things. She said quietly that she was tired, but she wasn't going to hide anymore. Meanwhile, Cole received a call from his grandfather. He asked him with elegant coldness if he had seen the video. He reminded him that associations with people without surnames bring noise. He suggested he stay away from scandals that don't concern him. Cole answered with monosyllables that could mean everything or nothing. He hung up and stared out the window. The city below had lights that sometimes seemed comforting. He clenched his fists. He didn't like the feeling of helplessness. He didn't like the word destiny on other people's lips. And, even less than anything, he liked the idea of seeing that woman alone in a room reading a letter that no one had wanted to read. He decided to do something that wasn't in his manual. Cross the line. He didn't do it with flowers or speeches. He did it with an envelope that carried moral weight. Inside, he placed a copy of the covenant document the family quietly venerated and his handwritten renunciation of any ceremony arranged by the council. He didn't need to justify it. The Blackwood's internal law wasn't above the laws of his own conscience. He went outside without an umbrella. He walked to Hannah's building like someone going to a place that might not forgive him. He climbed the old stairs, which creaked like complaining wood. He rapped on the door. When Hannah opened it, she still had the notebook and the key on the table. He placed the envelope next to those two objects, as if presenting credentials to an entity that evaluated him differently. He didn't make a speech. He said a few words. She listened without blinking. As he read, the world changed density. The walls seemed to widen. The rain outside turned into me. Hannah didn't know if she could handle everything that was coming, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Cole reached out a hand without touching her, asking permission for her story. "You're not alone," he said with the kind of certainty that doesn't sound like an empty promise. She opened the drawer and took out the letter. She placed it on top of the packet and, for the first time, signed it with her full name. Then she packed the 3 symbols in her purse like someone packing a new map: the letter, the notebook, and the key. The city didn't stop to applaud that gesture. It continued with its traffic, its arguments over soccer games, and its cafeteria microdramas. But in a small apartment, 2 people had chosen not to follow someone else's script. The following days were an exercise in balance. Cole faced old gazes in rooms where family portraits watched like judges. His grandfather spoke of consequences. His father spoke of image. Cole spoke of the limits. The company didn't collapse, the sky didn't open, but the air grew heavier. Mara, who understood the invisible scores, respectfully told him that maybe he needed a communication strategy. He nodded. Everything was more complicated when one tried to do the right thing in silence. Hannah, for her part, decided to return to the studio before being formally invited to stay home. She walked with her head held high, not out of defiance, but out of hygiene. Some people averted their eyes, others whispered. A young editor stopped her in the hallway with a kindness that seemed compassionate but was condescension. She responded professionally and continued. At her desk, she placed her notebook next to the keyboard. As always, she opened a project and let the work sort her out from within. At lunch, she found an envelope with no return address in her locker. Inside were printed clippings of cruel comments and a typed note with a sentence that was meant to be funny and was actually miserable. Her hands trembled slightly. She closed the locker and breathed slowly. She wasn't going to cry in that bathroom. She wasn't going to betray her reaction to anyone. That afternoon, when her shift ended, bloggers were waiting for her outside. A white light blinded her. Sharp questions came like pebbles thrown by cowardly children. They called her a climber with a selfie smile. They asked her if she tried on any of the rings the Blackwood family keeps in safes. Hannah stood still, her back as straight as she thought of her mother serving a cheap stew that looked like a party. She thought of her 15-year-old self. She thought of everything she'd swallowed to keep from becoming bitter. The scene tensed to the point of breaking. That's when Cole appeared from the edge of the crowd. There were no escorts or ties. There was determination. He stood beside her without touching her. He looked at the cameras with the calmness that had scared off 2 girls in a hallway. He said nothing, and yet he said it was over. Onlookers, disappointed by the lack of a fight, put away their phones. Blogs were left with blurry shots of ordinary people walking. Cole walked her silently. She didn't thank him with words. He didn't ask for credit. They stopped under a dripping tree. The world, for a second, seemed a simple place. 2 people and 1 rain. In the days that followed, the city tried to invent new stories with the same characters. Sometimes it succeeded, other times it failed. Hannah began recording small triumphs in her notebook, a perfect rendering, a coffee paid for by a colleague who didn't dare be polite in public, a laugh shared with the night watchman. Cole, meanwhile, formally resigned from the council. It was an administrative act with the weight of a domestic revolution. Grandfather didn't forgive him. Father silently understood, though he would never admit it. Mara filed the document with a look that said, "I'm on your side even though no one asked me to." There was an afternoon when everything could have gone wrong again. North Studio was commissioned to put on a massive event at the Municipal Theater, a charity gala with live streaming and social media, the kind of place where mistakes aren't just seen, they're shared. Hannah was put in charge of the technical script. For her, it was both an honor and a trap. She knew that if something went wrong, her last name would be the first to be called. She also knew that if everything went well, the credit would be distributed like rain in a schoolyard. The day arrived. The city put on its Sunday lights even though it was Thursday. The theater lobby shone like a promise. In the booth, the air smelled of wires and nerves. Hannah adjusted her headphones and looked at her watch. She told herself to breathe in blocks of 5. The test music sounded clean. The cameras responded. The graphics came in on time. Outside, the guests sat with the elegants who know how to sit. In the front row, Cole took a seat wearing a dark suit that looked like it was made for evening wear. The show began normally until, halfway through the first segment, a graphics server failure caused a cascade of errors. The donor names appeared jumbled, with letters that didn't match, as if someone had stirred the alphabet into a puddle. The host, confused, filled in with jokes. In the booth, the broadcast manager shouted commands without direction. Hannah felt the familiar buzz of crisis. Her mind clicked. She shut down the conflicting server, activated an emergency profile, called an operator on the floor, and asked for a camera movement that would cover up the error for 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, she redid the list from a local backup. The audience didn't notice the surgery. The manager continued shouting to justify his own fear. Hannah got back into the swing of things, as if nothing had happened. When the block ended, a standing ovation meant for philanthropists became a small, personal round of applause that no one heard. She allowed herself a smile. She thought of her mother. She thought of the unsent letter, now signed. She thought of She clutched the notebook to her chest for a second, as if it were a talisman. She continued. Later, at the closing, the artistic director decided to have the host improvise a commentary on the rumors in the city. It was a mistake. Rumors feed on microphones like fires on the wind. The host, without any malice aforethought, said that sometimes fate brings together seemingly opposite paths. On camera, the production team panned over the front rows. The lens captured Cole's profile and, behind him, by pure coincidence, Hannah's face in the booth, reflected in the glass. Social media did the rest. Within minutes, screenshots began circulating suggesting a story they still didn't know what to call. As the gala ended, the theater emptied with the speed of expensive venues. Hannah emerged from the service door, a mixture of tiredness and lucidity. Cole was waiting at a safe distance. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was a simple decision. Walk her to a taxi. Talk for 2 minutes. Say what you can say when everyone thinks they're seeing more than they're seeing. They stood on the wet sidewalk. She told him she was tired but fine. He told her the gala had been impeccable thanks to her work. She shook her head with learned modesty. He persisted with the calm firmness he used to convince himself. They didn't have to mention the obvious. The phone calls that had run, the rumors that would be fabricated that night, the part of the city that enjoys invading the privacy of strangers. Hannah got into the taxi with the notebook on her lap and the key in her hand. Cole stood on the sidewalk, watching the car drive away. He didn't say anything grand. He told himself one thing. I'm not willing to lose something I haven't even started yet for fear of what others might say. The separation, as is often the case in stories that are later remembered, came without shouting. It came from the accumulation of small renunciations and an anxious strategy of protecting the other who unwittingly distanced him. Cole decided to publicly distance himself for a few weeks to lower the noise. Hannah accepted this distance like someone accepting necessary treatment. They sent brief messages, shared long silences, and each, in their own rooms, learned to listen to the echo of their own voices without being confused with the chorus outside. It was during that time that the city set the oldest trap for them, a public event where eyeballs carry double weight. North Studio received an invitation from the Blackwood family itself to screen a short film at a foundation's anniversary gala. It was a dangerous courtesy. Hannah knew her presence there would be interpreted as a declaration. Mara called to assure her that no one would use her as a pawn. Hannah hesitated all night. In the end, she decided to go. Not out of defiance, but out of consistency. On the night of the gala, the Blackwood mansion looked like a museum that had finally learned to smile. Gardens aglow, a marble staircase, an orchestra playing as if every note could change the weather. Hannah arrived wearing a very simple black dress her aunt had lent her. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a small twinkle in her eye that she hadn't bought in any store. Cole watched her enter from the landing and felt something close to gratitude, not for her presence, but for her quiet courage. The whispers began as soon as the orchestra settled in. Some people approached with conditional friendliness, others with questions disguised as praise. Hannah responded politely and economically. In a corner, grandfather watched with a tight frown. Father maintained a functional neutrality. Mara, as always, floated diplomatically between the groups. The short film was shown flawlessly. Applause, clinking glasses, catalog-sized smiles. When the lights dimmed for a set change, a man who had once been a family friend and was now merely a noisy guest decided to gain prominence with cruel humor. He raised his voice with an impromptu toast, insinuating that the city was full of young people looking for quick stares and that some stares had last names. The audience laughed the way people laugh when they don't want to be a spoilsport. Hannah felt the familiar stab. Cole moved a step, just enough for the audience to understand that this joke wasn't going to fly. The man lowered his glass. The orchestra resumed. The night continued, marginally better. When the clock struck a decent hour for retiring without offending, Hannah went out into the gardens to get some fresh air. The moon made no promises, but it was supportive. She sat down on an iron bench. She took the letter out of her bag and folded it the other way around, as if changing the surface would also change the destiny. She took out the key and clenched it in her fist until it left a mark. Cole arrived next, no footsteps to frighten her. He sat down next to her, not too close. He said that sometimes the city hurts more in beautiful places. She nodded. They didn't look at each other. Their conversation was a low music that the wind understood. The final twist of that night came not from an enemy or a trap, but from a memory. At some point, near the end, Hannah spoke of her adolescence in the past tense. She said she'd grown tired of believing she had to transform herself into an acceptable version to deserve to be. She said she was no longer going to secretly rip off labels. She said she preferred to keep them as scars that matter, not marks of shame. Cole listened with an attention he had rarely used in his public life. He understood that the cursed pact, in reality, wasn't written only on notarized papers. It was written in the habit of letting others define. That certainty accompanied him days later when he stood in front of a camera at a conference that was supposed to be about infrastructure and ended up being, inevitably, about his life. A reporter asked if the family planned to honor traditions. Cole responded with a yes and a no at the same time. He said the only tradition he planned to honor was that of taking responsibility for his decisions. He said there would be no rituals that use people as shields against fear. He said that legacy is not preserved with secrets, but with actions that resist scrutiny. He was brief and forceful. The room, for once, understood that there were no more useful questions. Leaving the conference, Cole didn't go to his office. He went to Hannah's apartment with a sure step. She opened the door, notebook in hand, a new piece on her shoulders. They didn't make solemn promises. They did something more difficult, clearly stating that they would choose each other without hiding who they were, with labels, with fears, with keys that open doors they don't yet know. The story didn't end there. No story worth telling ends with a conference or an elegant evening. Outside, the city continued to bet on its opinion polls. Inside, on a small table, 3 objects breathed together as one: the signed letter, the green notebook filled with phrases that strained the light, and the small key that, sooner or later, would find its lock. And you, on the other side, might be wondering what you would do in their place. Would you stay quiet so they'd leave you alone, or would you go out with your key and find your own door? Tell me in the comments and subscribe if you want to follow along with what's coming. Your support means a lot to me. This story is just now opening the lock. In the next episode, the city will decide whether to believe what they see or what they're whispering, and Hannah and Cole will have to be careful not only with what they feel, but with what the truth asks them to put on the table. The first dawn after the conference doesn't bring peace, it brings a stubborn clarity. Hannah wakes up before her alarm goes off, her green notebook open on the table and the signed letter under a cup of tea. The city outside continues with its usual noises, but inside something is coming together, as if it's found a secret melody. Cole left late, not for the drama, but because learning to say, "I'll stay" takes time. On the counter, next to the small key, he left a brief, handwritten note. No empty promise, just a simple plan to walk together a block a day, in plain sight of anyone who cares to look, hiding nothing. The neighborhood neither applauds nor condemns, it observes. At the corner deli, the owner winks at Hannah when she sees her head held high. In the elevator, an elderly neighbor modestly strokes her arm and offers her a jar of jam as if it were a spell against bad times. Hannah thanks without crying, deciding that this will be her ritual, accepting tenderness when life throws it. At North Studio, the week begins with paperwork that smells urgent. The manager calls a general meeting and talks about reputation, protocols, and brand protection. No one mentions Hannah's name, but the air points to her. She listens silently, takes useful notes, puts useless ones in her pocket, and then throws them away. As she leaves the room, Leela, the only colleague who ever quietly left a coffee on her table, catches up with her. Leela whispers to her to be careful with a veteran editor who's been angry since losing an account. Sometimes angry people don't want justice. They want witnesses to their unhappiness. Hannah nods and returns to her work island like someone returning to a port. The first transformative moment occurs that afternoon, when she receives an anonymous email accusing her of having accessed material that wasn't hers. The accusation is absurd, but the shadow is long. Instead of desperately defending herself, Hannah requests an audit of her session and makes it available to everyone. She uses her bare hands to turn on the lights in a room that someone tried to darken. The boss grunts, uncomfortable, because transparency ruins the drama for her. The audit confirms her cleanliness with a precision that disarms any gossip. Hannah jots down in her notebook a phrase that comes out like a breath. When I owe nothing, glass is my friend. Cole, at the same time, learns to walk on his own glass. The withdrawal from the pact isn't a statement, it's a crack in the marble. On the board, some smiles become tight, some partners make calls they haven't made in years. Mara looks at him with that mixture of respect and prudence possessed only by those who know how to dance in rooms with chandeliers and traps. She suggests he move forward with a scholarship program that's been on the table for too long. Nothing washes away a stale history better than a gesture with a bone. Cole agrees and adds a detail that compromises him more than is appropriate. The scholarships will bear the surname of his grandmother, the woman who taught him the difference between tradition and superstition. The second transformative moment comes domestically. Hannah opens an old box in her mother's house looking for a winter coat and finds an envelope heavier than it looks. Inside is a twin key, identical to the one she always carries in her purse, and a short note from her grandmother written in blue ink, for when you find the door. The writing is firm and sweet. Hannah caresses that paper like one caresses the hand of someone who is no longer there. She tells her mother that she always thought the key was just a metaphor, a charm against bad luck. Her mother smiles with a luminous sadness and tells her that grandmothers always leave secret entrances to places that matter. Then Hannah takes both keys and keeps them together, as if they've finally found her lost sister. The news once again entangles their names when a columnist decides to mix the scholarship initiative with a fabricated romance. The column insinuates that the young editor arrived to soften up the air and that everything is scripted in an expensive office. The city reads with the gentle morbidity of Sundays. Hannah feels like her invisible teenage sweater is being tugged on. Cole feels like his last name is being stepped on like a rug. Neither responds furiously. They arrange an exclusive interview with Mara, but not to fuel the rumor mill. To talk about the scholarship program with the people who really need it, students who work at night and pursue degrees during the day. The interview is recorded in a community center on the less photographed side of town. Hannah walks among plastic chairs and blackboards with motivational phrases that, for the first time, don't sound like slogans to Cole arrives with his sleeves rolled up and a humble demeanor that doesn't resemble a suit. They speak little in front of the camera, letting the kids who need scholarships speak, the teachers who contribute out of their own pockets to buy photocopies, the mothers who take their sleeping children to night school. In the closing interview, the host asks Hannah about the labels she's been saddled with all her life. Hannah takes a deep breath and responds without anger that labels don't come off, they take on new meaning. That the words weird and provincial brought her to that room because they taught her to look people in the eye. That if anyone wants to keep an old nickname, let them. She no longer recognizes it as her own. The room, which isn't a room, is a community, listens with respectful silence. That night, the video is shared with a different tone. Malicious comments don't disappear, but they lose strength in the face of something harder to break down, the truth spoken without shields. The third transformative moment comes with a return Hannah had been putting off. She returns to her high school for a homecoming organized by a teacher who always held the door for her. The building greets her with the smell of chalk and a wet playground. In the trophy hall, the reflection in the glass gives her back the image of the girl she once was and the woman she is, superimposed like a stained glass window. One of those classmates who laughed at her laughter approaches with a cheap wine in hand and a canned apology speech. Hannah listens, not to approve, but to free herself. She appreciates the effort without theatrics. There is no hug, no reconciling photo. There is something more adult, the right to continue walking without dragging old furniture. Cole waits for her outside in the car, not because he wants to get her out of there like an impromptu hero, but because he's learned that sometimes being there means being available without invading. She gets in, her eyes shining, not from tears, but from the cold wind. They sit for a moment in silence with the engine off, listening to each other's breathing like the ocean at night. Hannah rests her notebook on her lap and writes a sentence in quick ink. Today the key didn't open a door, it opened a window. The visible antagonist of this new phase isn't a single person, but a chorus, a company competing with North Studio that begins leaking working documents and mounts a dirty campaign to win over clients. The strategy includes veiled accusations about the professionalism of Hannah's technical team. The director of North Studio calls a crisis meeting. The veteran editor, who can't stand it, sees in this chaos his opportunity to grow by kicking heads. He suggests removing her from the flagship project out of prudence. Hannah feels the familiar pang but decides to do something she wouldn't have done before. She raises her hand and asks to speak. Her intervention is brief and surgical. She presents a risk map she's been building in her notebook over the course of weeks. It reveals blind spots in the system that no one had seen before. She proposes fixes and protocols with an order that isn't intimidating, but rather helpful. The director settles into his chair, surprised that the solution is handwritten in pencil on a worn notebook. The veteran is left without a script. Leela squeezes Hannah's shoulder like someone throwing a rope from the deck. The final decision is clear. Not only is she not being removed from the project, she's being put in charge of the technical trend. As she leaves the room, Hannah leans against the wall for a second to get her heart rate back to normal. It's not arrogance, it's simple self-preservation. Then she returns to her desk with a renewed calm. The fourth transformative moment occurs on a stage redolent of hot wires and metal, the set of the biggest event of the year, a cultural festival broadcast live across half the city. Hannah conducts a small, invisible orchestra from the booth. The rundown has narrow margins, as things that go well tend to do. In the central block, a thunderstorm plays with the signal. The monitors flicker like nervous eyes. The floor manager asks internally if they're cutting. Hannah, with the calmest voice of the night, says no, they're going with Plan B, which they rehearsed in the dark. She switches to backup batteries, asks camera for a steady pan, and speaks to the sound engineer as if extending a hand to someone about to slip. The block comes out with a raw beauty, with minimal flaws that the audience interprets as aesthetic. The audience applauds, unaware that they're applauding the pulse of a woman who danced with a storm and didn't miss a beat. The fifth transformative moment isn't technical or public, it's intimate. Hannah is alone in her apartment. In the early hours of the morning, the unsent letter, now signed by her, has a new wrinkle in one corner from so much back and forth. The two keys rest like sisters on the notebook. She lights a candle on a whim, because she likes the way the light dances when the flame is small. She opens the letter and reads it softly, not to feel nostalgia, but to gather momentum. Then she writes a new letter, not to her future self, but to the 15-year-old girl. She tells her that they survived the hallway, the nickname, the silence. She promises that, even if new nights of rumor and fear come, they will no longer hide. She folds that letter and tucks it behind an old photograph of herself holding a poorly admired trophy. The candle finished sweeping wax. Hannah extinguishes the rest with a short breath and goes to sleep with the simple certainty of someone who no longer owes herself explanation. Meanwhile, in the Blackwood Ring, Grandpa moves pieces that smell of relics. He invites everyone to a closed-door dinner with associates who thrive on the theater of power. There are knives wrapped in linen napkin. Cole arrives wearing a dark suit, his heart on guard. Grandpa feigns a toast laden with nostalgia and threat, remembering his ancestors, and introducing a young woman with an impeccable surname as a symbol of continuity. It's an old trick, but he makes it with the conviction of someone who believes himself the guardian of destiny. Cole takes a deep breath and resorts to a simple truth. There is no continuity without respect. He announces in front of everyone that the scholarship program is already underway and that his public commitment cannot be reversed. No one applauds, nor does he get expelled. The dinner continues as if the background music had just changed its tone. Mara, from a corner, presses a message on her phone. Sometimes the way to win is to not play their game. The city prepares one last test, the cruelest and most useful, an awards ceremony at the Municipal Theater, with press, cameras, and speeches that bite. North Studio is nominated for a technically impeccable piece, and everyone knows the award is filtered more by politics than merit. Cole, invited as a speaker for his scholarship program, and Hannah, as part of the nominated team, will share the stage without a joint script. Networks love this kind of unexpected choreography, not to celebrate encounters, but to record mistakes. Theater night is an animal with shiny skin. The aisles are filled with flowers that smell like expensive gardens and nerves that don't have any. Hannah stands backstage with the timesheet and green notebook clutched to her chest. Cole waits his turn in a blue-lit hallway, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if tuning an instrument. Rumor seeks its prey. Someone deliberately leaks an edited audio recording of a jury member joking about awarding the heir's girlfriends so the blogs have something to talk about. The file circulates at the speed of poison. Hannah finds out from Leela minutes before she takes the stage. The pang is physical, like a whiplash from the past. She could leave the room. She could call her mother. She could scream. she does something else. She takes her notebook, carefully tears out a sheet of paper where she'd written a chamber map, and on the back writes a message that speaks directly to her heart. No one gives you anything you can't build. She takes a deep breath, and when they call her name, she walks with the back straight of someone who isn't asking permission. The presenter feigns naturalness, but he has the eyes of someone who's just read what's scrolling on their phones. He announces the category. He reads out names. He takes a long pause that doesn't improve the suspense, only mars it. The award is given to another company. For a second, relief and anger form a strange alliance in Hannah's stomach. She applauds the way professionals applaud, respectfully and with a relaxed jaw. The presenter jokes, and the camera pans awkwardly around her. She holds his gaze without a smile. It's not defeat, it's a refusal to have her gesture written down. Cole's turn comes later, almost at closing time. He goes up with a folded piece of paper he doesn't plan to read. He looks at the audience and, for the first time in a long time, he doesn't see numbers, or investments, or votes. He sees faces. He talks about his grandmother and keys that open doors that aren't just metal. He talks about the city that wins when it stops measuring people's worth by their last name. He doesn't name Hannah. He doesn't need to. He names the students he met at the community center, the teacher who pays for photocopies, the night watchman who recites poems in the hallway to keep him awake, the mother who cooks a stew as if it were a party. He makes a difficult request, that the applause not always go to the same people. The audience, surprised, applauds in earnest. On the way down the hall, they pass each other. There are no overacted words. Hannah hands him the sheet of paper on which she wrote the afternoon's quote. He tucks it into his jacket pocket like a relic. The noise from the theater rolls in. The night hasn't yet decided whether it's going to be. As we step outside, the press approaches with its usual hunger. Cole barely touches Hannah's elbow, not to hide her, but to say, "Here I am." A journalist asks her if it hurt to lose. Hannah replies that art isn't a horse race and that a team isn't judged by a statuette, even if statuettes look nice on the shelves. Another asks the usual question about whether her story with Cole is real or just marketing. Hannah smiles tiredly and says the truth doesn't need a hashtag. A genuine laugh erupts from the crowd, the kind that brings the circus to a standstill. The night softens a little. They walk to the corner in silence. In Cole's pocket, the piece of paper with Hannah's quote rustles. In her purse, the two keys jingle. They decide they don't want to end the night among marbles. They look for an open cafe, one with mismatched chairs and decent soup. They sit facing each other, their backs against a fogged-up window. Hannah rests her notebook on the table. Cole leaves the folded piece of paper beside it like a napkin with a drawing on it. They order tea and toast. They talk about small things that are big when the world tries to magnify the neighbor's jam, the lame dog that always sits in the studio doorway, the sound of the keys when you edit in the middle of the night. It's at that table where the final small earthquake of the evening occurs. A woman strides forward, places a blue box on the counter, and approaches the back. It's the teacher who organized the homecoming. She recognizes Hannah and hugs her with the ease with which one hugs someone who grew up. She says that, while cleaning the school, she found an old locker with an envelope inside addressed to Hannah. The blue box isn't just any box. It's the miniature locker the kids used in first grade, like a safe. The teacher opens it as if drawing back a curtain. Inside is a small notebook, a duplicate keychain made of worn metal, and a photo printed with cheap ink showing a girl wearing a hand-me-down sweater in a hallway and, behind her, blurry but unmistakable, a boy looking in the opposite direction, as if guarding the background. The ink has eaten away part of the image, but Hannah's eyes recognize that back. The teacher doesn't ask anything. He drops off the box, claps goodbye, and leaves because the bus isn't waiting. Hannah and Cole stare at the photo as if it were a treasure map. They understand, without saying it, that their story didn't begin in an elegant lobby or a conference room, but in a high school hallway where one learned not to look and the other learned to endure without witness. The small notebook has a single sentence written in teenage ink. "I'll find the door and I'm going to tell a different story." Hannah closes her eyes for a second. The two keys jingle softly in her purse, as if in chorus. Dawn finds them with their elbows on the table and their hands crossed. Outside, the first buses carry stories that no one will write. Inside, someone wipes a trace of soup on the table with a damp cloth. The world, even in its longest nights, is always making room for what's next. This story doesn't end with a frozen kiss or a clever headline. It closes, for today, with a promise without fireworks, to keep walking one more block each day, in plain sight, with the notebook, the letter, the keys, the reinterpreted labels, and with the patience of those who prefer to build deeply rather than hang laurels on borrowed walls. If you have butterflies in your stomach or questions on your tongue, let me know in the comments. What would you do with your old tags? Burn them or make them part of your emblem? Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because the city still holds doors that haven't been opened. Your support means a lot to me. In the next installment, someone from the past comes forward with a story that could shake the foundation, and Hannah and Cole will have to decide whether to confront the truth with silence or with a public act that changes the conversation forever. The morning after coffee smells of cold toast and old paper. Hannah can't stop staring at the faded photo they found in the little blue box in her locker. The one where a teenage girl wearing a hand-me-down sweater disappears into a hallway, followed by a male figure she now recognizes effortlessly. She thinks of the tiny notebook with that phrase in adolescent ink that promised to find a door and tell a different story. She leans it next to her green notebook and 2 keys, as if setting up a small domestic altar to turn to when the noise outside gets louder. Cole, in his penthouse, which no longer feels like a museum, wakes up with the sheet of paper she handed him in his jacket pocket and an idea swirling around like a bird uncaged. Meanwhile, the city is preparing another test. The competing company, which has been dripping innuendos for weeks, decides to call a press conference for 2 days. They promise to expose irregularities at North Studio, equate the scholarship program with favoritism, and, of course, make Hannah synonymous with scandal once again. The news outlets echo the invitation like bells. Hannah goes to the studio early. She enters with her head held high, although inside, a part of her would like to be invisible again for a while. Leela intercepts her with a lukewarm coffee and a loving warning. She tells her that the veteran editor is collecting signatures to request her preventive removal from the project. Hannah feels that dry pang she recognizes from other lives, but she doesn't stay in the hallway of whispers. She walks to the director's office, notebook in hand. She asks to speak. She lays out, without theatrics, a 6-step plan to strengthen processes, conduct cross-audits, and bring in outside voices. She speaks precisely, with verbs that neither accuse nor excuse. The director listens with the furrowed brow of someone trying to decide if what he hears is good for him, and ends up accepting each point. He entrusts her with coordinating the technical committee. There's no applause, there's work. That same afternoon, they light up a small room with whiteboard, post-its, and proper name. Hannah jots down in the margin of her notebook a phrase that reaches her like a helpful whisper. She notes that when the storm is public, the calm must be public as well. Leaving the studio, she finds an envelope with no return address tucked under her apartment. The edge is worn. Inside are photocopies of an old file with faded stamps. She recognizes the name of her high school, a note signed by the then principal, and the word discipline. Her back goes cold. Between the pages is a list of surnames. The first belongs to a boy who years later would become a star editor at the company that harasses her today. In the margin, in fading blue ink, there is a handwritten sentence that is almost lost. It says this matter is confidential at the request of the families. Hannah sits on the floor, her back against the door, and understands, without anyone explaining it to her, that there are stories that were never told to protect surnames, not people. That night, she calls the teacher who gave them the blue box. The woman invites her to stop by the school early the next day. She says she found, in a filing cabinet, a metal box sealed with old tape. She thinks it might be the remaining contents of a time capsule the students of that year prepared, which was never opened. Hannah hangs on with a knot in her chest and, for the first time in a long time, isn't afraid of returning to that building. She feels something closer to a delicate obligation. Cole shows up unannounced with sweetbread and that awkward smile he uses when he doesn't want to intrude, yet needs to be there. He looks at the photocopies and it takes him only a second to put the pieces together. He remembers that his grandfather sponsored some school activities back then and that he had a knack for putting out fires with checks. He feels embarrassed for her and also for himself. He suggests accompanying her the next day. He says this without the air of a savior. He offers his presence like offering a hand to help you get down a steep step. Hannah nods and puts the papers, keys, photo, and notebook back in her bag as if packing an expedition backpack. The school smells of floor wax and a wet playground when they enter. The teacher greets them with a mixture of nostalgia and haste. She leads them to the archive, a room with metal shelves, gray folders, and a window through which a dusty light filters in. On the table is a metal box that was once blue. On the lid, A sign in a school pen declares that it will be open when the generation reunites as adults. The tape sealing it is brittle. The teacher hands them scissors like one hands over a key. Hannah carefully cuts, lifts the lid, and the past comes out in the form of folded papers, cassette tapes, address books with signatures, letters with uneven handwriting. Among the objects, an unopened letter appears with the surname of the now famous editor. The teacher raises her eyebrows, aware of the delicacy. She says that, beyond the names, what's valuable here is what the community decided to save and perhaps forget. Hannah decides not to touch that letter. Instead, she takes a tape with a naive label that says Voices from the Hallway. The teacher brings a vintage radio recorder, which miraculously works. They put the tape down. The room fills with the nervous laughter of teenagers, the sound of footsteps, and the murmur of lockers. A girl's voice can be heard saying that she gets called freaky every time she crosses the hall. A group of people can be heard laughing behind them. A teacher can be heard telling another that these things happen all the time. There's also a very young voice trying to ask them to stop. Hannah presses her hands against the edge of the table. She knows that voice was hers, or that of another voice that seems like a kindred voice. Cole's throat feels raw. He looks out the window to avoid intruding. He understands, with a painful clarity, that the stories they want to fabricate about them today are adult versions of that same corridor. He also understands that, if they turn this tape into a weapon, they will reproduce the damage with the same methods they criticize. Hannah takes her notebook and writes a line that she doesn't erase. She notes that memory is useful when it's not used as a whip. The teacher proposes something bold and beautiful. She suggests holding a small ceremony in the school auditorium, open to alumni and students, to officially open that capsule and, instead of parading the guilty, release the burden of unheard voices. Hannah accepts, with a mixture of fear and relief. Cole offers to arrange, without logos or flashes, the technical equipment to carefully record the event. The teacher nods gratefully. The news of the school ceremony leaks out on its own. There's no flyer or press release, but the phones are buzzing faster than any news agents. At the same time, the rival company doubles down and announces its conference for the day after the ceremony, as if trying to establish a counter-narrative. Cole's grandfather, informed by his network of years, calls his grandson in that voice that seems carved from wood. He asks if he's willing to put his last name in a room where adult mistakes will be remembered. Cole replies that a last name isn't a statue, that if it takes up space, it also has to bear its own weight. The grandfather hangs up without saying goodbye. Mara writes Cole a message that's half hug, half warning. She tells him to be careful with the board moves when the pieces below are rearranged. The school auditorium fills with folding chairs, students with backpacks, and alumni with Sunday sick faces. The current principal opens with a brief, but necessary, introduction. She says they don't come to judge anyone. They come to hear what was kept in a box and, perhaps, into many voices. Hannah takes the stage with the little blue box from her locker and the tiny notebook. She doesn't speak of herself in the third person. She speaks of an entire generation that learned to keep quiet in order to survive. She reads, in a clear voice, the sentence from the notebook that promised to find a door and tell a different story. She invites students and alumni to read excerpts from letters that point no one out, that recount fears, that ask for forgiveness without specific addresses. The room falls silent. Some cry with shame. Others sigh with relief. In the back row, a woman who was once the one who laughed looks at the floor with a gesture that isn't exactly guilt, but rather conscience. Cole watches from the sideline, hands clasped. He has no need to take center stage. When the ceremony ends, the crowd doesn't applaud euphoria. They applaud respectfully. The professor closes with a simple idea. She says that opening a capsule doesn't change the past, but it can change the way we speak to each other today. That night, while they're downloading the footage, Leela sends them an urgent message. She tells them that the rival company, as promised, is about to publish an audio-visual piece that combines scenes from the ceremony with old headlines and screenshots to present as evidence. She tells them they'll turn on the broadcast in a few hours. Hannah and Cole look at each other with a strained calm. They decide they're not going to chase their own shadows. They decide to prepare, for the next morning, a public statement in which they neither deny nor argue, but rather explain what the ceremony was about and what they're seeking, the scholarship program and the audits. They also decide to edit a short video with snippets of students' voices that can't be used as bait, but rather as testimony. Before going to sleep, Hannah holds the signed letter in both hands. She reads it again, not to change anything, but to remember why she started writing. She leaves the letter under her teacup, as always. She sets her keys beside it. When she turns off the light, the city is still humming. The next morning brings a twist no one had planned for. Blackwood's lawyer sends an email with a cold subject line and sarcastic language. He reports that, due to the escalating public tension, the board considers a preemptive measure prudent to protect the family's image. He requests, with the courtesy of ultimatums, that Cole refrain from any public appearances with Hannah until the storm passes. He suggests the scholarship program continue, but without his face in front of it. Translated into the language of the hallways, he is asked to back off. Cole reads the email once, twice, and then picks up his phone. He calls Mara. They speak briefly. She tells him that a resignation hurts more at first than later. He smiles with a weariness that doesn't weaken his resolve. He asks her to call the board to a special meeting that same afternoon. Hannah arrives at the studio with a calm face. She knows the email exists, but she doesn't interfere. She has her own battle with language. She records, in a plain room, her statement for the network conference. She speaks to the camera as one would speak to someone you respect. She explains what the ceremony was about, why she won't read letters from others, why opening boxes isn't a show. She thanks the community and explains the technical steps North Studio implements. She doesn't defend her name, she defends a way of working. When she finishes, she breathes and looks at the camera like someone returning from a trip. The cameraman gives a thumbs up. The Blackwood Council receives her from a distance, through screens with impeccable backgrounds. Cole is in a smaller room, without sculptures. He speaks clearly. He says he won't heed Hannah's suggestion to distance himself, that he won't trade his humanity in exchange for good press. He says the scholarship program isn't a reputational polish, it's a real bridge, and he'll walk it with the person who inspired it. He adds, with a calmness that surprises even those listening internally, that his resignation is signed and dated in case the council decides to choose another kind of continuity. No one answers immediately. Grandfather blinks as if dust has fallen into his eyes for the first time in years. Someone calls a recess. Cole hangs up, remains alone in the room, and for a second rests his forehead on the table. It's not defeat, it's the concrete weight of having chosen. That same evening, a motorcycle stops in front of Hannah's building and leaves a large envelope against the door. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, is a yellow document with official seals. It's a copy of the famous Family Continuity Pact, the one everyone calls a curse even if they don't know it. But what matters isn't the central text, but the notes in the margins. In ink, in elegant cursive handwriting, there is a note signed by Cole's grandmother. The note establishes, in her own hand, that no paper can force a grandchild to sacrifice their personal life or their conviction, and that any tradition that causes harm must be considered broken immediately. The date is many years ago. The document was there, dormant, like so many keys waiting for their door. Hannah trembles without shame. She knows this isn't a trophy, it's a tool. She takes a photo and sends it to Cole with a brief message. She tells him that maybe the door they needed to open wasn't at school, it was in their own house. Cole receives it as he walks down the hall toward the elevator to get some air. He stops. He looks at his grandmother's signature. He feels something click inside him. He calls Mara. He asks her to help him notarize the document and present it correctly. Mara laughs for the first time in days. He says there is justice that comes in cursive. The rival company, oblivious to all this, switches on its broadcast. They begin with clumsy editing that attempts to link the school event with influence peddling. At minute 3, the signal drops for a second, as if the system refuses to cooperate. It comes back. They continue. The video has no power, just noise. At minute 5, the networks begin to tire of the tone and instead share clips from the school event with underlined phrases. The tide turns without scandal. The city, however, demands one more stage. Cole calls a press conference for the next day at noon at the community center where everything began to come together. He doesn't choose the golden room. He chooses the room with plastic chairs. He invites the press, the community, the school, the studio. Hannah tells him she'd be there, but not on stage. She prefers to be in the second row with the teacher, Lila, and the students. Cole nods. He's inwardly grateful for the chance, finally, to speak with words other than marble. The night before the press conference, Hannah leaves her signed letter on the windowsill, under her teacup. She places the 2 keys on top. She opens her notebook and writes a single line, as if it were a personal pact. She writes that if the storm returns tomorrow, she won't run into the hallways. She walks straight toward the door she finally recognizes. Morning arrives with a clear sky and a wind that ruffles flags. The community center room fills. Cameras are set up without getting in the way. Cole takes to a makeshift stage with a borrowed lectern. He greets the people of the neighborhood by name. He asks Mara to read, as a witness, her grandmother's handwritten note that deactivates the pact as a mandate. The paper trembles slightly in Mara's hand, not from fear, but from emotion. The cameras zoom in. The cursive writing fills the screen with a dignity that needs no effects. The murmur transforms into a silence very similar to gratitude. Cole speaks later, without a word of explanation. He says that, as of that very day, he's resigning from any position that ties him to decisions he can't face head-on. He says the scholarship program is formalized as an independent foundation with a joint board made up of teachers, students, and neighbors. He says that, in his personal life, he chooses not to hide. He doesn't want to make his affection a publicity, but he's not going to pretend it doesn't exist either. In the second row, Hannah feels her heart pounding against her ribs, as if she wants to come out and listen better. A journalist asks if he isn't afraid of losing support. Cole replies that he'd rather lose loud applause than lose the peace of mind when he looks in the mirror. Another journalist asks if this means a break with his grandfather. Cole says it means a break with his way of understanding his heritage and that, in any case, it may be the beginning of something more genuine. And just when it seems the scene has finally taken shape, the morning's final twist occurs. From the back, someone places a small box with a simple ribbon on a table and leaves without saying their name. No one sees them clearly. Hannah, reflexively, approaches and opens it. Inside, on cheap velvet, is a simple keychain with a tag on which someone has carved to crooked, beautiful words. It says "Open Door." Hannah lifts her key ring. The two keys in her purse jingle like discreet little bells. Cole, from the stage, can't help but laugh with the boys' surprise. They look at each other without pacts or protocols. The audience rises to its feet with applause that doesn't ask. That's all for today. The city still holds questions and doors. What would you do with a document that can change the conversation for a family and a community? Would you keep it as a weapon or show it as a bridge? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next installment, where the cursive grandmother returns in the form of stories no one heard and where a personal decision finally brings the outcome. Your support is very important to me.